Welcome back to the Kentucky Kernel Sports Podcast. I'm your host, Peyton Dybowski. Today we're going to talk about Big Z's return, some of the women's basketball team stats, and the abysmal loss against South Carolina for the men's team. Welcome back to the Kentucky Kernel Sports Podcast. I'm Peyton Dybowski, and I'm joined with three familiar guests. Do you want to introduce yourselves?
Me first? Okay. My name is Ali Chetanok, and I'm one of the assistant sports editors.
I'm Colton Johnson, and I'm a staff reporter with the Kernel.
I'm Cole Park, and I'm the sports editor.
All right, so let's start with the men's. We faced off against Georgia, and UK pulled out the win. UK finally got to see Zvonimir Ivišić, or Big Z, the 7-2 Croatian sensation, play. Everyone was very thrilled that he got to get some minutes. I know that he entered the game and got a standing ovation, and he just showed out. What did you guys think about that game?
Yeah, I mean, I thought it was something special. I will be the first to admit that when I heard Z was going to play, I wasn't expecting a whole lot. We'll get to it in a minute. I was expecting more along the lines of what he did against South Carolina. But, yeah, I mean, he thoroughly surprised me. Got a block really early on. I think, I got to be honest with you, the behind-the-back pass to Antonio Reeves that connected for three was top 5 sports moments I've ever witnessed. Like, that place went insane. Press row went insane.
Yeah.
Like, people on press row were like, what did I just watch?
Yeah.
And then I remember, Ali, you leaned over to me and you said, now I just need to see him hit a 3. And then he hit 4 deep shots in a row. It was like, what are we doing?
He almost had a 360 dunk on it, guys. So that would have been crazy, too.
I mean,
and I'm sorry, but the 2 they called looked like a 3 to me. That's all I'm saying.
He just got big feet. One was on the line. But he's now the tallest player in UK basketball history to score a three-pointer. I believe he passed Bradshaw, who passed Olivier Sarr earlier this year.
No, yeah, like you said, it's nice to look back at the Georgia game and all, but after what happened the other day in South Carolina, it's kind of a bit of a damper on what happened. But, I mean, he only played, 13 minutes, and he led all cats in scoring, I think, in those, or was he behind?
He was top 3 scoring, but
Okay.
Trey Mitchell was the leader, I believe.
Okay, yeah, he was behind Trey. But, I mean, come on now. If this Kentucky team is what we think they are, at least at home right now, just adding another piece like that, which, I mean, we're going to get into it more. There's some people who would argue that he's better than Aaron Bradshaw or whatever, but having a team that's this good already and adding a 7-2 guy that can hit threes and multiple of them back to back to back and have the skill that he does, I mean, not many 7-2 guys are going to hit that behind-the-back pass, but he definitely did. So it just makes this whole Kentucky team better. At least we're going to talk about South Carolina game more, at least at home.
Yeah, I'm kind of in the same mindset that you were in. It's kind of like, how much better can this team get? Add another freaking tree, and it just gets that much better. But all in all, with that Georgia game, I was just impressed with how much of a well-rounded overall team win it was. It wasn't just one guy doing it all. And in the same respect, it kind of highlighted how quiet Antonio Reeves goes in these games, despite the performances he puts together, despite the things that he does on the floor. I mean, for me, it kind of shows for me how underappreciated he is. And I really do think that he's kind of the base layer of this team, truly.
Yeah, I mean, just go back to that Georgia game, because the one big problem I did have with the Georgia game was the defense. I mean, you can't let the Bulldogs come in the Rupp, score 61 points in the second half. You're just not going to win like that. And then we saw the next day that Achilles heel of this team come back to bite them right there. So we're going to get into the South Carolina game here soon, too. But there's a lot of things, at least on the defensive side of things, that really need to change. And that stood out in Georgia and came back and be the reason why we lost to South Carolina just 3 days later.
Yeah, no, definitely. Obviously, looking at the second half, the Cats did have a 28-point lead, but they were forced to hang on to that lead later. Some numbers for you. Trey Mitchell led the Cats with 23 points. Reeves had 21, and Wagner had 18. And that was a season high of 10 assists for him as well. So definitely saw some well-rounded gameplay from the Cats.
Shout out to Big Z's technical foul, too. Love to see it.
Oh, yeah. You can't do that in the States, man.
Maybe should have got 2, but he only got 1.
We won't talk about that.
He almost did it again against South Carolina, too. But, yeah.
I was talking about almost fighting somebody. But,
yeah. there's just some things that he needs to get out of course, but he's going to get there.
Moving on to more of a sad note, lost to South Carolina 62-79. The Gamecocks won. Cooper tied his own career high with 20 points. Jacoby Wright added 14 with 4 threes, beating their highest-ranking opponent. And the fans rushed the court to celebrate their win and were given a $100,000 fine from the SEC. What are your thoughts on how we played versus South Carolina?
As for the fine thing, that's pretty standard procedure. UK got fined 2 years ago when they rushed the field versus Florida. That's just kind of the way it goes. It all gets put into a big pool at the end of the year and divided up between the SEC schools. I think it's kind of cool. But my takeaway from the final score of 79-62 is too generous. Kentucky lost this game by 17 points when they were trailing by almost 30 at one point. They deserved to lose this game significantly worse. They decided with maybe 6 minutes left, forgot defense exists. Let's try to play some of that, and was able to get a little bit back into the game. But, I mean, it was, for lack of a better term, it was pathetic, wasn't it? I mean, we're all watching this game. I thought they would struggle going in. I did. But they were down. You know, it was a big three-pointer to end the first half. They were down coming out in the second half. But you'd expect a team of Kentucky's caliber to respond. They responded negatively. They got worse in the second half. I mean, I pulled some numbers here as well. Justin Edwards had 2 points, 0 for 1 from the field in 23 minutes. Aaron Bradshaw, despite being a +4, I don't know how that happened, had 4 points with 3 attempted shots. DJ Wagner had 4 points. He was a -9. He was 2 for 10 from the field. That is 10 total points from a combined 74 minutes of playing time. You can't have that happen. I mean, we talked about it after the Georgia game. There's a lot of Kentucky fans willing to kind of bury their head in the sand and say, you know, who cares if they got a bad defense if their offense is scoring? Well, their offense wasn't scoring, and then you gave up 79 points. I mean, it was a just heartless performance by Kentucky.
Yeah, I mean, just a complete lack of effort and defensive side of things. I mean, it's been the problem all season long. We can see it against way back Kentucky State, even that defense might be an issue for this team. And right now, you're going to see that, especially down the season goes and we go into March, that these type of games where you're not going to hit shots just aren't falling for you guys, and the other team just seems to hit everything. You got to rely on defense, and this team is not built like that. And also, I just want to say, I don't know why Miji Johnson thinks he's Michael Jordan every time he wants to play Kentucky, but I have an interesting stat against the Gamecocks. The Kentucky Wildcats are 0-4 in football and basketball in the last 2 seasons.
Shouts to Devin Downey. they highlighted that man in that game as well. Shouts to that man.
I don't know. I just think South Carolina has UK's number in every sport right now.
I actually have a point about that, but Colin, you got your...
I mean, it was really just the complete inverse of what happened against Georgia. I mean, when everything goes right, for a certain extent, obviously the second half wasn't the greatest against Georgia, but no half was great against South Carolina. And I think there's always a stigma with a Kentucky team, especially one that's as talented and as talented as this one. There's always this, I'd rather them lose now than lose in March. But the thing is, when you lose a game outside of March, you have the ability to address issues and fix issues. And I don't want to necessarily call him an issue, but I'm not saying he's not an issue. But I think every single guard on this Kentucky team, as talented as they are, every single one does something and has a certain role.
Yeah.
I'm still waiting to figure out what Justin Edwards is. It's not, for me, it's just not clicking.
I mean, here, let me just pull up
his role
some
is
of his
take-up
totals
minutes right
here.
now.
That's what I'm saying. 23 minutes and 2 points is just meh. I can't do that. Off free
With
throws.
one field goal. One field goal attempted, 0 for 1.
Yeah, they're free throws. The points were free throws.
I mean, his last 3 games, he had 2 points against Mississippi State, 6 against Georgia, 2 against South Carolina. If we go farther than that, he hasn't scored more than 10 since he had 13 against Louisville, which I thought he was his best game of the season. And, I feel like every Kentucky fan asks, this is going to be the game that we see Justin Edwards just absolutely pop out and be what everyone thought he's supposed to be, and it just hasn't happened yet. And it comes to a question where, how bad does it get before he doesn't start? Because honestly, that's probably going to be the last thing that happens is see Justin Edwards on the bench to start a game.
It really starts raising questions, though, as to I know the team says they don't do that. You really have to start wondering how many players have guaranteed minutes on this squad, because
Absolutely.
at
I can
this
give you a
point-
list of them.
Because at this point, there's no justification for Justin playing the minutes he's playing. There really, and
Absolutely.
to that point also, though, while that is a season-long talking about that needs to be an issue, I will say this was just kind of a bad game across the board. Everyone at Kentucky's their savior, the one that they're saying should take his spot, Reed Shepherd, had 3 points,
Yeah.
1 for 4 from the field, with 3 rebounds and no assists. So you can't even really say he was doing the fundamentals. 2 turnovers. He played 14 minutes. He was a negative 11 in the plus-minus. So it was just a laughable
And
performance
with-
across the board.
And I kind of want to not go in on Reed Shepherd here, but kind of go off of what you just said. And, Kentucky fans are going to hate what I'm about to say, but there are games that Reed Shepherd just simply disappears in. I mean, he's the type of player that he could score 20-plus any night. He could also just score 2 any night, too. And I'm just saying it's a long far cry from where that national championship player of the year talk was coming, lottery pick even, and
Absolutely.
it sucks to say, but we are a long ways away from that talk too. But I will just say one thing about the South Carolina game, and the reason they lost is lack of effort and defensive scheme just does not work. The good thing is both of those things are very fixable,
Yes.
but the thing is they need to fix it fast because they're going to a rowdy Bud Walton, which
Mhm.
you'll be at.
I
I'm
will
not
be
going to
at.
be at, but it's going to be crazy there. So the good thing is it's an opportunity to bounce back, but it's also an opportunity to go even deeper down because Arkansas is not a good team.
No.
If
But-
anything, I would also add that I think this South Carolina loss. I mean, I think it's been evident ever since he's left the floor, but I think this game showed how much Kentucky misses Adu Thiero.
Mm-hmm.
I think he was a big missing puzzle piece for him then.
And I don't know what's going on with the dude. I mean, you don't just miss 6-7 games off of general soreness. I don't know what that is, but at this rate, it'll be interesting to see, if he even sees the court again this season, because if a guy is dunking in practice and he's not playing games, there's something else going on.
Yeah. I will say there was a quote that went pretty viral from the broadcast team. Said Kentucky's got a national championship level offense and a round of 32 defense. If they play like they did against South Carolina, they got a first 4
Yep.
defense. But
They can get there.
to a point about what you said a little earlier, I just kind of want to throw this number out there. I've got a story coming out about this in a little bit, but it was the beginning, I believe, of 2022, March, the SEC tournament, when Joanna Edwards for women's basketball hit that 3-point shot to push Kentucky women's basketball to an SEC title over South Carolina, who was undefeated at the time. Since the Cats beat South Carolina in that game, women's basketball, they've lost 87-69, 95-66, and most recently 98-36. That's 0-3 against South Carolina since that shot. In men's basketball, since that shot, last year Kentucky lost at Rupp 71-68, lost 79-62 most recently. That's 0-2. In football, since that shot went in, 24-14 loss last season, 17-14 loss this season. Kentucky is 0-7 against South Carolina since that shot went in.
They took it personal.
They did take it personal in all sports, it seems.
Very much so.
One other player I wanted to look at, one more thing about the South Carolina game, was Antonio Reeves. He's normally UK's leading scorer at 19.6 points average per game, but he only had a 1 for 7 shooting in the first half with 7 points early after the half. And the Cats were within 40-38 with 15 minutes to go, but then the Gamecocks took a 22-6 run to open an 18-point lead with less than 8 minutes to play. Any thoughts on where Kentucky's hot hand went? Because they had no answer to South Carolina shots.
Yeah, it reminded me a lot of last year's team game. There was games last year when you talk about the hot hand, and Antonio Reeves was expected to be that a lot of times. And simply put, it feels weird to say it, especially for a guy that's trying to build an NBA level, prospect grading. But everyone's going to have off games sometimes, even the best players in the sport. And ideally, you want a game where if Reeves isn't having that kind of game, everyone else will. And then as you saw last year when he was really one of the only guys with a hot hand, they lost a lot of games. This time, he's had a really great team around him that it hasn't been a much of an issue, but this time where everyone else was missing, everyone else was struggling, it reminded me of a lot of last year's team and kind of how unfair that situation was to Reeves in a lot of ways.
Yeah, and, the other night, no one had a good game, but I will shout out one person had a decent game, to be fair, Rob Dillingham. He was kind of the only shining light for Kentucky. He had 16 points in 26 minutes. He was 7 for 14, so 50% from the field. But he was 1 for 4 from behind the arc, so just 25% shooting there. But Rob Dillingham, if you take away that Georgia game where he only had 2 points and you could see him on the bench really upset with himself. The last few games he had 23 against Mizzou, 15 again in a loss against Texas A&M, 16 against Mississippi State, and then 16 again against South Carolina. So, at least it's good to see at least one of the freshmen at this point kind of going out there and hooping, but he needs some of his other classmates to join him.
I'd completely agree. And you can call it an extreme take if you want to, but I'm really at that point where I think that Rob is probably the best freshman in the country, in my opinion.
Yeah.
I don't know how much of an
think that's
argument there is to
crazy.
oppose that.
Yeah.
But I don't know. I mean, we're at that point where there's the element of Rob coming off the bench being an aspect of his game, and you wonder how and if his game would be affected if he was to start. But with the way that this, especially after the South Carolina loss, but you just saw how stagnant that offense was.
I mean,
you need a guy like that out there.
I'm a guy who thinks, it's not crazy to have Wagner and Dillingham on the court at the same time.
I will say, though, also with Rob, though, he had some clips go a little bit viral after that loss that there's some question marks defensively with Rob, not with his ability to defend, but more so with his decision-making on defense sometimes.
Absolutely.
Makes some weird reads, and I think part of it, a little bit of it, maybe, to be honest with you, goes into what Ali just said about being frustrated in some recent games with, not being on the court like he wants to or struggling like he wants to. You've got to get that guy to fully buy back in to be a piece of the puzzle again and not, try to play hero ball, which I don't blame him at all for doing when he was the only player playing well against South Carolina and his whole team was. But also when you try to take too much on your plate in that way, then you leave guys wide open and it leads to further problems. So I want to see him kind of lock back into the defensive scheme a little bit more. He wasn't the only one doing that. A couple players were doing that, kind of trying to do their own thing, and you don't want to see that. That's what causes teams to collapse the way this one did. But I think all of that, just comes with hopefully some maturity and growing as a freshman.
Absolutely.
Oh, yeah, all good points. And if we move on to another team that was disappointed by South Carolina, the women's team finally broke their 3-game losing streak. They won over Missouri 76-71. Kentucky built a big lead against the Tigers, but to only see Mizzou eventually tie the game. Eventually they stuck with their playmaking, and we saw a win finally. Any thoughts about that game?
Well, like you said, they played a really, really solid game. They had a rough first quarter, pulled it back in the second. They took the lead then. And it was really kind of fluid for the rest of the game until those last 2 minutes. Missouri came back and tied it at 71, and I was like, okay, here we go. Here's the Kentucky that I've been watching all season. And, I guess it must have been a strategic thing. They put the player that played at South Carolina in. She had Anaya Russell had a great, great game.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, she had the game-winning shot. May or may not have missed a couple free throws at the end, but that's fine. But for me, I don't see a reason why she shouldn't be playing more, if not starting. I think she's one of the more talented players on this roster, and I think there's definitely more players that either start or get significant time that are out there just taking up space. Not to slander her, but when Emma King's out there, she's not taking a charge. She's standing there in the corner waiting for a ball that most of the time never comes. So, I think there's obvious decisions that need to be made with this team, and I'm waiting for them to be made.
Yeah, I think it's a sneaky call that despite having a bit of inconsistency at the start of the season, Anaya Russell's becoming probably the most dependable player on this roster.
Absolutely.
Especially with how many injuries it seems Maddie's been dealing with all season long. You can't always rely on her in that way, and Anaya's been there. It was kind of the opposite of the Kentucky-South Carolina game in this way. It was a good offensive showing for Kentucky. Maddie and Anaya combined for 39. Petty went 12 with 10 rebounds, and Sanaya Tyler scored 10 as well. So having 4 players scoring double digits, especially for this team that has struggled this year, was a big sign in a game that we talked about it a little bit last week. But this was an absolute must-win for Kentucky. At the time, Kentucky's kind of jumped up 2 and 3 in the SEC, but at the time it was number 14 versus number 13 in the SEC, the 2 worst teams in the conference at home for Kentucky. You cannot lose that game.
Absolutely not.
And it was not pretty. In fact, it was quite ugly at times, but they got the job done, and at the very least, it salvaged what would have been probably an all-time losing skid for Kentucky.
Yeah, I can't really speak to what would have happened with that program had they not, if they, especially just with the late game collapse, like what could have happened. I mean, they put the ball in Anaya's hand there at the end because, Maddie fouled out. She fouled out with like a minute and a half left, so obviously your big shot taker's not in. So they put it in Anaya's hands, and Coach Elsie said they just pretty much put her on an ISO. Said, go get us a bucket. And she did, to her respect. But as good as things did go in this game, I think it did also kind of bring to light some of the issues that I think are going to plague this team as we get into more conference games and more talented teams. I mean, being realistic, Missouri's they won the game. It was one of the more winnable games for a reason. But Asia Petty, she's been far and away Kentucky's best player this year. A lot of coaches on other teams are saying she's the most improved player in not only the SEC but if not the country. And in the third quarter, there was a scrum for a ball, and she kind of messed up her ankle, and she went down a little bit, and she was out for a couple minutes. And it was evident the second that she went out. Coach Elsie put 5 guards in right after she went out. I don't know if that was on purpose, but that lasted about a minute until they put Janae Walker in. But even when Janae Walker was in, there was, absolutely just exploitation in the post, and it was pretty evident. And if Missouri's going to do that, and they're a shooting team, if Missouri's going to do that, every team's going to do that.
Every team's going to do that. So, it just kind of makes you wonder a little bit looking at this team and how well Anaya's kind of blossomed and how Asia Petty's most improved. It makes you almost frustrated. Where would this team be if Kennedy Cambridge hadn't left? Where would this team be maybe even if Jada Walker hadn't left? I don't know how early she made that decision, but,
Nia Leverett was healthy.
If Nia Leverett was healthy, yeah, there's a lot of pieces to this team that's like, man, like this team feels like if it just had 1 or 2 more stars, they could actually be a solid SEC team.
Yeah.
But
right now they're middle of the pack right now, and I'll say Kentucky has one thing going for them right now, and if you take away South Carolina, the rest of the schedule, besides Ole Miss and Mississippi State, everyone else is currently below them in SEC standings because I'm going to be honest, while the SEC is probably premier teams of the sport at the very top, at the very bottom, there are some really bad teams. And
it tends to be a top-heavy conference.
Yeah, and it's not crazy to say that there's 4 or 5 teams in the SEC which are actually worse than Kentucky right now, which means Kentucky has an opportunity to get some wins under its belt. It's just, you kind of just mentioned it there. It's just a question about stuff going on behind the scenes in the program, which we can talk about a little later about what changes actually need to be made within the program. There's one big one. Can you guess it?
If they're not very obvious, yeah. If they're not that obvious.
Even Russell stated that UK's offense benefited from the lessons they learned from the from the loss from number 1 South Carolina on the 15th. So I definitely think they'll learn from these mistakes. We already see them improving, winning the game finally. But looking ahead, should start with the men's. They're going to be facing Arkansas next. Kentucky is currently 14-4, and they are 4-2 in SEC play, while Arkansas is 10-8 and 1-4 in SEC play. Arkansas does have wins over 2 teams that we lost to, Texas A&M and UNC. And their ball handling and perimeter shooting has caused a lot of issues for their team. So how do we think Kentucky's going to take that team on?
Yeah, I think that this is an absolute must-win for Arkansas. I believe they've lost another one since then. I think they're 10-9, 1-5 in the SEC, I want to say. They most recently lost by 26 at Ole Miss in an absolute thrashing. Simply put, there's a lot of jokes about Arkansas, people unsure how they're going to be this year, talking about the Must Bus. The Must Bus is burned, charred, put out, caught back on fire. It's in ashes right now. If Kentucky doesn't win this game in Bud Walton, and
it's a scary place to play.
It is a scary place to play. Bud Walton's a tough place to play, but this is a team that is fighting to be over 500 right now.
Yeah.
So they've lost to UNC Greensboro. I don't want to put too much emphasis on that. Kentucky's lost to Wilmington, so those UNC teams, they're tough. But simply put, Arkansas has struggled in SEC play.
Yeah.
The one win they have was by 1 point. Then they've lost by double digits against South Carolina, at Ole Miss, at Florida, at Georgia. And they lost by 32 against Auburn, I believe. So, and that's an Auburn team
packed out game in Bud Walton Arena history too.
That's an Auburn team that's still confusing on its own. They just lost to Alabama, so you never really know what to expect from that one. I mean, they've got Tremon Mark, who's averaging 17.8 points per game. It's worth noting he was out versus Ole Miss when they lost by 26. That was listed as a migraine. But, he's been a really big player, especially back in the battle for Atlantis as well. They got Khalif Battle, a name a lot of people will be familiar with, 11.5 points per game. Kentucky's favored by ESPN predictive metrics by 70% in this game.
Whoa. You said he's out with...
He was out. I believe he'll be back.
With a migraine, you say?
Yes.
Well, I have a migraine watching Arkansas this season, actually. They are, like you mentioned, they're 12th in the standings right now, which is crazy. Arkansas was supposed to be not just an SEC contender at the beginning of the season, but, there was talk about being a national championship. You're talking about the must bus. It always seems to crash when you get to around the second weekend, and there's serious talks about this is the year that they could really go on a run.
Well, last year they upset Kansas, number one overall seed. That was a big-time team last year.
Well, you see, and there's always going to be talk about the must bus doesn't really start going until March. That's always, his teams are always good at the end of the season. Well, right now they're not even going to get there if they don't figure it out. And I mean, she kind of mentioned it just a minute ago. They're shooting, I think it is 36% from the field and just 27% from beyond the arc. Like, come on now, Arkansas. I know you're better than that. You know you're better than that, and everyone at this table knows they're better than that.
The must bus is totaled.
I mean, it's just a complete – with Arkansas in that program in general, I think it's just an overall, fall from grace from years past. And the teams
they beat Duke this season, at home. It's not like this team isn't capable. I just think they're not doing it right now, which is crazy to see. They have good players on their team, and I just don't think anything's really going right in Fayetteville right now.
But bottom line, I think it should be pretty far and away. Kentucky should. And if they don't win this game, I think there's a certain panic button that may or may not need to be pushed.
I would agree. I think they had a close win at Florida, but other than that, they've struggled on the road. I don't even count Louisville as a true road game because of how mixed that crowd was.
Absolutely.
If they lose at Arkansas, I'll be there in attendance, but there does need to start being some serious questions about can this team play on the road?
I think I saw a stat that Calipari's 9-7 in those last 16 road games or whatever, something like that. And that's scary. I mean, he has a winning record, I guess, but he still got 7 losses right there on the road. And I don't think that this is going to be one of his losses, but they have a defensive performance that they had against South Carolina again this weekend, it's going to be very possible, and it's going to be, reputation damaging too for Kentucky. There's all this talk about Kentucky's resume right now, and I know Cole and I talk about that all the time, and this is a game that could really only hurt Kentucky, I think, which is a bad thing for them. But this is a must-win game if there's ever been one.
I think there's a really big possibility that even if Kentucky does win, that there will be a bunch of talk in the manner in which they win.
Yeah.
If it's not overwhelming and pretty evident, I think there's going to be a lot of question marks raised, nevertheless.
What are your picks for this game? Who do you think has it winning?
I'm picking Kentucky.
I'm going to pick Kentucky by 12.
Yeah, I'm going to make that a 3 for 3. I'm going with the Wildcats.
4 for 4. Moving on Wednesday, January 31st, back at Rupp Arena, the Cats face off against Florida. Florida's currently 12-6 with their overall record, and they're 2-3 in SEC play. What do we think about thoughts on that game that's going to be played?
Yeah, last time the Cats played at Florida, that was a close win in that one. Walter Clayton Jr. and Zion Pullen combined for 46 at home. That was an Exact Tech Arena in Gainesville. Kentucky was able to get the win late. Big play by Aaron Bradshaw ended up giving the Cats, I think, getting back into it and then taking a lead. They would never really lose. Florida's kind of been wishy-washy in SEC play. They lost pretty badly at Ole Miss. They've got wins over Arkansas, Missouri, and Mississippi State, all teams that hopefully by this point Kentucky will have beaten as well. They also lost at UT 85-66. So they tend to – Ole Miss is kind of the question mark there, but they tend to beat the worst teams in the SEC and win against the better teams in the SEC. So if Kentucky is what we think it is, history should say they should lose this game. Florida should lose this game, I mean. But it's one that, you can't take lightly. This is a revenge match for Florida. This is one they want to win because they lost so close on home floor. So this is going to be a team that's motivated, and I think a lot of this game has to do with how does that Arkansas game
Yeah.
go. If Kentucky loses that Arkansas game, this could be dangerous.
A bad
Because this is a team that wants to come in and get an upset win. But if they beat Arkansas, hopefully, the momentum will be on their side, and they'll be able to kind of take care of business, sweep the Gators this season. But it's definitely one that is not as certain as I think some people might be looking at it.
Yeah, Florida's always going to be a tough team, but I think luckily for Kentucky, it's at Rupp. And Kentucky right now, for some reason, just a completely different team when they play at home. So they have that going for them at least. And, a lot of this game is going to kind of depend on what happens Saturday in Fayetteville. But, if we're going to have any predictions here, I was going to guess that they're going to go 2-0 this next 2 games.
Like you said, Cole, I think Florida is very the epitome of a middle-of-the-pack team as far as in this conference this year. But
Definitely sneak into the tournament, though.
Absolutely. But to a certain extent, I think those, especially at this point of the season, those are kind of the scariest teams to play, especially if they're coming to your crib. Because in a sense, I don't think they have anything to lose. What you're like, oh, this team came out and beat us at home. I think it's going to be they should win convincingly, but I would not rule out some Gator inspiration in Rupp.
You know what Florida how I look at Florida this year? I look at Florida as potential NIT champions this year. That's kind of the level I see them on. I think that they could win the NIT. If not, kind of sneak into the first 4 kind of games there. So that's not opponent to overlook. It seems like I'm looking down on them, but you should not look down on a team like this.
No, it's a very losable game.
They're 35th in KenPom rankings right now, so it's not a bad team at all, and it's definitely going to be a game. That's the thing with the SEC this year. We're going to say this virtually for every single game this here on out, is that it's going to be a must-win, and it's going to be a game that, after these last few performances are losable games, but they're also winnable if they kind of, figure out what. Yeah, no. Vanderbilt might be a scary one for them to go to, but it's going to be. What is Vanderbilt in KenPom now that you said that? But
they're very low. They're around 100, I think.
Let's see there.
I think they've won 6 games this year. I don't know if I'm right or wrong on that.
Yeah, they're pretty bad.
Yeah. Whatever's going on in Nashville isn't really working.
They're not the lowest Power 6 school, though. You all know who is the lowest Power 6.
I think I know who they are.
I think it's actually DePaul, but Louisville is.
They're down the road. I was going to say.
Impressive.
Arkansas is at 105 now.
I figured they were around the 100 mark.
Yeah. So Oklahoma State 117. That's a shout for probably worst Power 5 team right there. But
oh, brother.
So
yeah,
kind of back and forth about who might take this game. Hopefully Kentucky. What are your picks for this one?
Kentucky.
2-0 the next 2 games.
I'm going to ride along with that. I know it's a little boring when it comes to predictions, but I'm going to go with Kentucky.
I agree. All right, and then moving on, the women play tonight. Play Arkansas. The women's Arkansas team is 14-6 with their overall record, and they're 2-3 for their SEC play, same as Kentucky. And Kentucky is coming off a huge win. How do we think the Cats are gonna take this game tonight?
Well, the first time they played Arkansas, it was a good win, and they needed that win, but I want to highlight how abysmally Arkansas played in that game. They came into that game, they were leading the SEC in 3-pointers per game and 3-point attempts per game, and I think that's still the same. But they went 0 for 13 from 3 in the first half. Kentucky won by 10. Now, granted, some of that was, some fouls at the end, trying to get back into it, and Kentucky was making some free throws. But I just don't see Kentucky going to Fayetteville and beating them.
Yeah, I'll keep it brief. This game will already have happened by the time this episode goes live, but my notes pretty much say exactly what you just said. Arkansas had an all-time bad scoring game in Lex. It's a revenge match for the Hogs.
Absolutely.
Give me Arkansas.
Yeah, give me Arkansas.
Me as well.
Same way.
Furthermore, Kentucky is going to face off against Alabama. Alabama is coming off a 3-game losing streak, so maybe the Cats have a chance there. Bama is 15-6 with their overall record and 2-4 in the SEC, and then we'll see how Kentucky shows up after they play the Razorbacks tonight. Any thoughts on that game?
Yeah, Alabama does have a win over Louisville. That's ranked Louisville at the time. Kentucky did lose a closer one there. They've been kind of wishy-washy in the SEC as well. They do have some wins on the road. I'm not sure what to think of Kentucky on the road at this point. I still can't get over when they went to South Carolina and just were still in Lex for all intents and purposes. They just didn't show up to that game. So let me see how the Cats do in Arkansas, if they can show that they can travel to road games again, because they did have a good one at Louisville, even though they ended up losing it. But I'm still picking Bama.
I mean, I'm kind of in the same boat with you. I mean, I think it's a team that, as of now, they're kind of on par skill-wise with Kentucky. But I think just Kentucky's inability to show up on the road is going to plague them, and I'm gonna go with the Tide on this one.
I mean, they're bound to win on the road at some point. So give me the Cats in Tuscaloosa. Just why not? Why not?
I agree. I think that maybe there's a chance this team will pull their shit together, pull out a win on the road.
Your optimism blinds you.
Go Cats. And that's all for the Kentucky Kernel Sports Podcast. Thank you for watching. You can go to kykernel.com for all of your UK athletics.